Okay, so welcome everyone. My name is Kara Kaikini. I use she, her, hers pronouns, and I'm the Executive Director of the Maine State Breastfeeding Coalition. And before we get started, I wanted to share a few things with you all. First, for future reference, you can find our recorded meetings on our YouTube page. Oh, go back here. And we are planning some excellent webinars for 2024, so stay tuned about those. And if you, sorry, these are moving along really fast. I tried the timings and I did not get them right, so bear with me here. You'll see it come back through. So our evaluation forms, we don't offer CEUs at this point, but you can get a certificate of completion if you fill out our webinar evaluation that I'll be sending out after. And see if we can pause it here. I don't know. Want to thank our sponsors for being here. We have for supporting us and our work that we are doing. So thank you to our sponsors. We also have some QR codes there if you are interested in continuing to support our webinars. We offer these for free for everyone, and we are hopeful that we can continue to do that. So if you are so inclined to make an end of the year donation, please feel free. I will drop that link into the chat box during Brittany's presentation as well. And we will come up to our, let's see here, bear with me. So welcome to our December educational webinar all about breast pumps. Brittany Regan Fisher has worked in the health and wellness field for over 8 years with a focus on education as well as birth and lactation support. She has worked as a birth and postpartum doula, a hypnobirthing practitioner, and a CPST. Brittany is currently on the board of the Massachusetts Breastfeeding Coalition and is the National Director of ZipMilk, a project of the Massachusetts Breastfeeding Coalition. She's also the Regional Account Manager at Acelleron, a local durable medical equipment company. So thank you, Brittany, for being here. I'm going to stop sharing and allow you to start sharing your slides.
Thank you so much. Can everybody give me a thumbs up if you're able to hear me well? Awesome. All right, great. So my name is Brittany Regan Fisher. I use the pronouns she, her, and I'm going to start sharing my PowerPoint. Hopefully that goes up the way it should. Awesome.
Great.
All right. So I'm going to do an agenda, a few intros, things like that. As Karen mentioned, it may make the PowerPoint and the presentation go a little bit more smoothly if your cameras are off, just for bandwidth with our internet and everything. I do want to see you, and I would love if you ask any questions to have your camera going. Kara does know that I love being interrupted with questions. So if you have a question that's pertinent to what I'm talking about at that moment, please, feel free to put it in the chat and Kara will let me know. We also have a sort of Q&A section at the end. So I'm going to jump into the PowerPoint itself. Now, I do have the date on here because that's when we're meeting, but also the information that I'm presenting is based on the time frame that we are in right now. Prices, pump options, things like that all change super frequently, as we all know. So here's our agenda. So I'll do some introductions for myself and a disclosure. We're going to talk about some key terms and considerations for pumps and pumping. We're going to talk about what's new for pumps and accessories, cycle and pattern options. And then my sort of bread and butter and what I love to talk about is support for pumping and lactation overall. And then the last section will be our question. The primary goals of this workshop is to analyze common pump terminology and considerations, discuss and compare possible benefits of different breast pumps and what's new and coming up on the market, and as well as identify support necessary to improve pumping experiences for lactating individuals. A little bit about me. I am, again, on the board of the Mass Breastfeeding Coalition. I just completed my first year or so. So I have my second one coming on. It's been very exciting. I do live in Massachusetts in Groveland. I have 5 kids of my own. One that I did not nurse, and is my stepdaughter. And then I have 4, including my latest additions, which are just about 20 months old, are my twin girls. So I have nursed, pumped, and triple fed, donated milk, and sort of run the gamut of experiences there. So my professional knowledge is part of my journey, but I also have a lot of personal knowledge. I am still pumping and nursing. I'm also the National Director of ZipMilk. One exciting update for ZipMilk is it is a support network for families to go for free to find support based on their zip code. Maine is going to be joining ZipMilk soon. We're in the process of getting them up and running, so that's something that they will reach out to everybody about. And then ZipMilk is also a great place for providers such as yourself, if your state is on there, to list your services, whether it's support groups, IBCLC, medical professionals with lactation, and so on and so forth. I also work at Acelleron, which I'll talk about in a moment, and I am on pathway 3 to my IBCLC. My disclosure is that I am an employee for Acelleron, which is a health and wellness company at DME, durable medical equipment. So we do work with pumps. And I am in Massachusetts working with providers and patients on accessing pumps and accessories through insurance as well as out of pocket. I am not here as a representative of Acelleron specifically, but I do have information and can answer questions about some of the disease one has. All right, so jumping into the actual educational content today. So I have a few things in here that are big things that are coming up and things I want everyone to consider when we're talking about pumping for individuals. So the first thing is hospital grade. So the term hospital grade strength, comparable to a hospital grade, all of those different things have different definitions. And so hospital grade strength, and when you see that in use with a standard pump, and when I say standard pump, I mean one that somebody's getting through insurance to keep. So like Similary S6 or a Lancino Smart Pump 3.0. These are pumps that are single user, but a lot of them, like the Spectras, have hospital strength. So they are still single user pumps, but they have a suction strength similar to you might see with a Medela Symphony or an Amida hospital grade. Hospital grade set pumps are like a Symphony or again that Amida. Now these are ones that are multiple users. They just have their own collection kit. And so this can be really confusing for families. A lot of people will see hospital grade and assume that they can share it. In the United States, the majority of pumps are not encouraged to be shared, even if they have a 2-year warranty and is completed using that pump. That's just due to the fact that although most pumps on the market right now are closed systems, they have a barrier to keep milk and moisture out of the tubing. Where that closed system is, whether it's before the tubing or at the pump motor, is a little different per pump. And so hospital grade Medela Symphonies and things like that have a barrier at the pump motor so that there's no cross-contamination, so it can be fully multi-user. As well as hospital grades like Medela Symphony have a ton of extra gusto to that battery and motor. And so those are motors that are meant to last a really long time and be inundated with use. So that's why they're typically in hospitals and used super frequently. The next thing I want to talk about are dual motor versus differentiated suction between different sides. So one of the newer things coming out are dual motor pumps, where most pumps have one motor that controls the suction for both sides. A lot of times people will say that the suction feels different if they're single or double pumping when they're pumping with a single motor pump. And that's because the suction is being directed to one place or to 2 places, so it can impact that suction strength. Something to note about suction strength, when pumps are FDA approved, their suction strength range and what they're putting in their approval, it actually doesn't need to be defined whether it's single or double pumping, so just so you are aware. Dual motor pumps have 2 motors, one for each side, so that an individual can pump with different strengths on each side. So this is a Spectra SG portable, and it's a dual motor pump. So you can see there's an R and an L on there, and that's because the sides can be controlled differently, similar to like a Similary S5 Plus and things like that. Now the difference between that and differentiated suction is those typically will pull at the same time, the dual motor pumps, just at different levels. Something you may notice with a lot of new wearables that don't have a joint motor, so for example, like the Willow Go, they can pull at different times. So this can be totally fine. It can be a great stimulator for somebody pumping, or it can be overstimulating. So from personal experience, when I pump with a wearable or something where the suction is differentiated, pulling at different times on the different sides of my chest, it's too much for me. It really is overwhelming. And so some people love it and they find it more stimulating. There are some pumps that have a slightly differentiated suction on purpose. For example, the Zomi Z2, their sucks are about, it's like a second or two apart. And so that's meant to encourage that stimulation. That's not too far off, so it doesn't typically interfere with anybody with any sort of sensory concerns. The last thing here for key terms are hands-free versus wearable versus portable versus all of the above. Wearable pumps are very big and popular, and they're popular for many, many different reasons. I just want to clarify for families and for providers, what those really are. So many pumps can be portable, but not be wearable or hands-free. So any pump really can be hands-free if they're using a hands-free pumping bra or cutting a hole in a sports bra to make it a hands-free pumping bra. It's just that they don't actually have to hold it to their chest. Now, that's with a standard flange or breast shield or with an in-bra. So any pump could be hands-free depending on the accessories used. That's why Medela has come out with their new hands-free cups. So there's still tubing, but it is hands-free. Portable just means if you can be on the go with it. So some of the pumps are portable, like the Spectra S1 has a handle and you can have a built-in rechargeable battery and walk around with it. But it's not, super easy to be portable with, right? Like I'm not throwing this in my pocket and going on the go, but it is able to move around. So the portability is something to consider. And lastly, fully wearable pumps are pumps that typically don't have any tubing and they can be put in bra and they are pretty discreet. And so, things to think about for that, for example, like the LV and the LV Stride. So the LV is fully in bra, all good to go there, fully wearable. The LV Stride is technically also wearable, but it does still have tubing and a motor that's separate. So it's more considered like a hands-free type pump because there is still something. There's a little bit of a clip there, so it can go on a belt loop or a shirt, but it does have the added tubing and factors to consider. Kara, do we have any questions about key terms or anything before I move on to considerations?
I don't see any questions in the chat box at this point, but anyone is welcome to enter questions in the chat anytime and we can answer those as we go.
Thank you much. All right, so some considerations when working with anyone for breast pumps, whether it's a family, a DME, providers, conversations with your local coalitions, anything like that. One thing that's really important to me are comparison grids. So when I say it's really important to me, I mean that they're a great tool, but you have to be very careful about where the comparison grid is coming from. They are super hard to maintain because things change for these pumps so frequently that if you have a comparison grid, you really want to check when it was created. Also want to see who created it. If a comparison grid is coming from a direct manufacturer, comparing their pumps to other pumps, verifying that the information on there is correct. I have seen many comparison grids that are incorrect or have wrong images from the pump brand to the name of it and so on and so forth. So just, take every comparison grid you see in with a grain of salt and definitely check the version date. And then if you are sharing it with families or providing any sort of comparison grid, just make sure you let them know that it can change. It's not an end all be all. I also wanted to talk about Medela Symphony, their Plus program versus standard pump phases and modes. So many hospitals are using a Symphony or hospital grade pump while the families are in hospital postpartum. And then that family may continue using that pump at home or most likely is going to switch to a personal use pump. So just making sure that they understand there is a difference between using that Medela Symphony Plus and the standard pump phases and modes. And that's because the Medela Symphony Plus program card has the initiate mode as well as the maintenance mode. And that initiate mode is something that they're in until they're getting up to about 120 mLs per pumping session over a few sessions, and things like that. So it's a little bit different than their general use for a standard pump. I've seen some people say, oh, well, with my Lancino, I can't move into the expression mode until I have been getting this much milk in my initiation mode or, massage mode. And so all of those terms and phrases, initiate, massage, stimulation, expression mode, can get very confusing. So if you ever have questions about it for a family, definitely direct them to me or to somebody else that has, that knowledge on those pumps, but make sure that they know they should be following the general guidelines for the pumps that they chose. We already talked about differentiated suction between sides. It is something to be aware of. We are seeing a lot of things. They're not necessarily coming out of the woodwork. They're not something that people haven't experienced before, but individuals are a little bit more attentive to their needs when it comes to how they're feeling when they're pumping. So we often tell people that they shouldn't be in pain while pumping, right? But you also shouldn't feel like you're going to jump out of your skin, right? That's not normal for pumping. And so if there's something to do to, make that a little bit less intense for that person, it's something to think of. So differentiated suction between sides is something to consider if you are in a consult with somebody and they're just like, they can't sit still or their leg is bouncing, where is that anxiety or that discomfort sort of coming from? And sometimes it can be differentiated suction or other things. The last thing I want to talk about is, and I have not coined this phrase, the Amazon effect. I just worked with a family who got a wearable pump for free through Amazon. And they were asking for some help with pumping and things like that. They also had another pump as well, but they figured, why not? This one is free from Amazon. It's a wearable. I have a toddler as well. I should definitely try this. And so now they do have a primary pump, which is something that I was making sure that they did have through their insurance or, elsewhere. But the Amazon effect is really tricky because the amount of options that our families are now looking at is exponential. I looked just yesterday at Amazon for pumps under $25 that are wearable or, in general, just pumps. And there were over 3 pages of choices of pumps, never mind accessories under $25. That is going to be very appealing to somebody, if they have less access to options based on insurance, or access to insurance and things like that in general. So if you are seeing some of these pumps, the hard part is you may not have access to the manual. So if you're working with a family and they have a pump that you're not aware of, do not ever hesitate to say, when you bring your pump in, please bring the manual. As Kara mentioned, I used to be a CPST, so car seat tech, and there was just no way to know every seat in every car and all of those combinations. Same thing for pumps. There's no way to know all the pumps in every individual and how those things might come together. So there is no shame in saying, can you bring your manual in when you come? Because a lot of these ones online, you cannot see the user manual. The majority of pumps that people are going to be getting through insurance or DMEs, typically those manuals can be found online. Any questions about key terms or considerations before I move on?
Not seeing anything at this point.
Okay. I do have the CDC guidelines on there as well. I think I deleted my bullet point on that for some reason, but the reason why I have those CDC cleaning guidelines on there are because the CDC has overarching guidelines, but then each manufacturer is getting more and more specific in there. So we no longer can just generally recommend the CDC guidelines. You can say that's a great starting point, but then they should also factor in what their manufacturer says. For example, Spectra just updated their guidelines that any of the silicone pieces on a Spectra, so that backflow protector piece or the duckbill valve, should not be boiled for the full 3 to 5 minutes or 4 to 5 minutes. They should come out earlier. Their old guidelines just said to boil the cleanable parts for 5 minutes. And so it is getting more specific. Some brands can't be put in microwaves or things like that for micro steam bags. And so it could warp or fully ruin parts that people are using And given that replacement parts for pumps can get very pricey, it's definitely not something that we would want to recommend and then have come back and then they've lost that part. So always, you know, there are set guidelines, but then manufacturer specific. All right, so I'm going to move into a couple things for what's new with pumps. One pump that I have been following for years is the Baby Asian pump. So I have not tested this. I will say I have not seen this one in person. It is about a $500 pump, which is pretty comparable to like a Willow or LV and things like that, the LV standard, the Willow 3.0. So some of the very expensive pumps. Some of the things that I think about when I'm looking at this, I'm just going to move something out of my way, is the low profile breast shield. So their low profile breast shield design, it is a silicone breast shield that you can see over there compared to the size of a golf ball. So that is really going just sort of on the nipple and areola, possibly some of the breast tissue and chest tissue as well. It is silicone. They do have some videos if you ever wanted to see what that suction looks like. They're mentioning that it's supposed to be closer to mimicking how a baby's mouth moves. And so, it's not moving where it is actually like a tongue movement, massaging that nipple or tissue to help, with that effective release of milk and transfer. But it is, a movable silicone piece. And so that is typically what they are mentioning there. So something to be aware of. They also have sizing where you get a small medium and a medium large, and that is for the breast shield itself. And when you're ordering, somebody is ordering more, they order a small medium or a medium large. And this is sort of how they're defining that here. I put that up there for you. For all-in-one, it has a pump kit that sort of has everything on the go. So the case itself is kind of like the bag. There's a cooler pack that you can use, and then the bottles sit right in there, as well as all of the parts for pumping. So it is kind of convenient where everything is all sort of good to go. And then the motor, the only thing is to consider is if the motor goes, right, that is the case, then so does your carry case and, things like that. So that's something to look at. I do have down here in the bottom image, a little bit of showing you what that sort of those cycle options and expression and the left and right, it will tell the person how much they have pumped. I have no data on how accurate it is. So for example, the LV standard pump tracks how much is actually produced during a session, and how accurate that is a little up and down. So something that I would think of for this, except this milk is going through a sensor. So it's not just a infrared sensor like on the LV where it's sort of monitoring it based on that. It's actually going through one. So it could be slightly more accurate. You'll see there that the tubing connects in its, I think they call it dual tubing. And so the tubing goes in 2 pieces to each shield side. So for double pumping, there's technically 4 tubes, but 2 are connected together on each side. And 1 is for air on each side, and 1 is going to be for the milk to actually go into the bottle through on that side. A little tricky to understand how that tubing works. My concern with milk going through tubing is the confusion it can set for people. It sets a different precedent than what we're used to now with milk not going through tubing with a lot of our closed systems and telling people that it should never be in your tubing. So it is a little confusing probably to families. The last thing I wanted to note was the tubing, since it does have milk go through it, needs to be replaced every day. So if somebody is pumping frequently throughout the day, they can use the same set of tubing, but after that day, they have to move to a new set. And so it does add up. You can get a set of 60 for $99 or 20 for $35, and they can set up for automatic reorders, but it's just another consideration. It's $500 pump, but then they are maintaining that for use. I can see, because we know with the realities of families, sometimes people do try to reuse things, and that is just something that is of concern, and whether that would impact the motor. But so this pump is officially launched and out. It took a few years for it to get out there. If anybody has more feedback on it, I would love to know. We'll move on. So I will quickly talk about some wearables. So, LV and Willow are just two of the brands. There are so many more now. These are the two that I have the most interaction with. There's a lot of other ones coming out. We'll talk about some of them in a moment, but when we're talking about the two brands that you may see the majority of, if somebody is getting it through insurance, it'll probably be the LV or the Willow. So the old school LV standard and Willow 3.0 are those fully wearable. One has a little bit more of a projection, that Willow 3.0, from the chest wall, so slightly more noticeable within a shirt. And then, the storage options of bags, can pump in any position, things like that. So these are the originals, as we might say. But they have both launched new ones, which I have on our chart here. They have the Willow Go, which is very similar to Willow 3.0. I don't want to say the old one because it is still available. So similar projection, except it does automatically come with the storage bottle, and there are no bags. And it does have a slightly higher suction strength than the original Willow. This one is a little bit less expensive. The Willow 3.0 is about $525, $550 nowadays. So this one's a little bit less expensive, still uses a motor, or a motor as well as an app. So you have those options. Outside of that, it's a closed system. Willow still has a 1-year warranty. The LV Stride is less expensive, and a big part of why it's less expensive is because although it is wearable in bra, it does have a separate motor still. So it does make that projection from the chest a little bit less, because that storage is the only thing that's really happening here, as well as the breast shield. You don't have the motor here, and so that's how it's able to be a little bit smaller. It is still 5 fluid ounce capacity, just like the original LV, and it does have a higher suction strength. 2-year warranty, says it's silent, and it is very quiet, so possibly a good option for families. Something that's very important to me with any wearable or any substantial investment, any pump should have great customer service from the manufacturer, but something that people are putting a substantial amount of money into, it's a pretty big decision for a lot of people. Really want that customer service to stand by. So if you ever have concerns with customer service for any manufacturers from any brand, definitely make it apparent, reach out to them, let the DME that you're working with know as well. Do we have any questions about the two wearables here, or wearables in general? I'm going to talk about one more thing, but I'll let.
Yeah, Brittany. So Emily mentioned something in the chat about how the Willow Go is one of hers that's hard to get centered properly on the nipple. And that's something that I've always wondered about too with wearables is, do you have any recommendations for how to best fit that? And then another related question that I have is what you think, and you may have said something about this earlier, but what you think about measuring nipples to determine the best sizing. I know I've seen different measurement tools out there, and I'm wondering what you think about that.
So that is actually, you're running the show, you know exactly what I'm going to talk about. I love it. So one of the biggest things with any wearable is the viewpoint of your chest and nipple and tissue overall. So being able to see your body in the pump is really important for having it centered correctly, as we mentioned, but also, we mentioned that fit. So with something that's more of a standard breast shield, you typically can see that nipple placement there. A lot of these pumps have, that clear barrier, or some of them might have not a clear or more of a frosted, but you can still generally see that. One of the wearables that you can see nipple placement, even when it is on, is that LV Stride. And so there is a little port here where they're going to pour out milk, but if you turn that to the side, when that is on, if you look directly in, and it's going to be terribly hard for me to show you here, they can actually see nipple placement. So they can see how it's moving when the pump is creating suction. They can see what it looks like before suction is even turned on. So that is one benefit to the LV Stride that's really great. The other pumps, so the Willow 3.0, the Willow Go, and the LV Standard are a little bit tricky. So for something like the LV standard, what they're recommending is that you size yourself ahead of time. So somebody is sizing themselves based on the lines on the breast shield that comes with the LV, and then they're putting it against their body. Now, the recommendation is to practice getting that alignment correct and all of those things, and then bringing that pump motor over and putting it on. Now, there's no guarantee that it's not going to shift when you put the pump motor on there. There's no guarantee that something's not going to have an issue and you have to take it back off anyway. We also know that although we are instructed to sit still while pumping, which is super frustrating, to have to do that, people do move. You could accidentally shift it and then need to reset it during a pumping session. So with the wearables where you cannot see and you cannot remove that breast shield, the Willow Go, you can remove the breast shield, so you can do some same thing as like the LV. See that there. What I recommend for centering correct placement, you're going to do your due diligence leaning forward to put it on the chest instead of sitting upright, and that's just due to the way that breast and tissue can change as we are sitting up versus leaning forward. So leaning forward can usually get a little bit of that fuller access. And then you really want to make sure that you're pushing against the body and up. And so you're pushing that back in to make sure that you have that really good seal there. Now, for alignment and how it's fitting, with anything where you can't see what's happening while pumping, a lot of people will just go based on feel. The first few times pumping with a new wearable pump, I always recommend, we're going to talk about sizing in a second, going through your sizing before your pump and things like that, but then reassessing the tissue in the nipple at about 5 minutes of pumping. So the chest has been stimulated, they've possibly had a letdown, and so that nipple has maybe increased in size and different things so that they can get a different view on how it's looking. They also say, I was feeling really good and comfortable, but maybe when you take it off, the nipple wasn't actually in place. And so some people are not as, they might not have as much sensitivity to nipple placement, and they may actually be off center and causing some, damage, but not feeling it. So checking in at 5 minutes is really important. For measuring nipples, something that's really important is to consider the fact that nipples are not a perfect circle. And so when measuring, it's important to measure up and down and side to side. So you're doing a horizontal and a vertical measurement of the nipple and going with the larger of those two. So that is if you're using a straight up and down measurement tool. There also are measurement tools that are a circle. And so you want that fit to be pretty close to the nipple size. So a lot of the research that we're seeing is mostly anecdotal. We have some individuals in IBCLC that are doing some long-term anecdotal research, which has been very helpful. And what they're seeing is that we really want it to be a little bit closer to the nipple than we may have said in the past. So previously we would have said something similar to the nipple should have room to move within the tunnel. And that's still true. We don't want it fully rubbing on the sides, causing friction and damage. But we don't necessarily need it, free floating and not touching the sides at all. So it is okay if the nipple does touch the side. And so that does bring our millimeter increase down a little bit. So what I mean by that is if somebody's nipple is measuring at about a 17, previous has said, add 4 millimeters, and 18, 19, 20, 21 millimeters, the shield you're definitely going to use. That's no longer necessarily what they're recommending. They're usually recommending a little bit more, like maybe 2 to 3 millimeters. And that's your starting point, right? So just where they're measuring is not an end all be all. It is also how the tissue changes when suction is applied and their general comfort. We really still don't want the areola pulled in. We just want it a little bit closer to it. Something that may be a more important factor as this gets a little bit closer to nipple size is the comfort in the shield or the flange. So using maybe some coconut oil or something like that so that there is no friction if it is touching the sides itself. I have also seen some research that the shield fit is different whether somebody is using a standard pump, kind of like a Medela pump and style, versus a wearable. So the research that I've seen, and this is only one research, anecdotal research project that I've seen, so it's not widely tested, is that the wearables should be a much closer fit to the size of the nipple. And so barely increasing that millimeter. So again, if it's a 17 millimeter, maybe using a 17 to 19 shield. Any other questions about that flange fit or getting that correct positioning?
That was great, really helpful. Thanks, Brittany. Oh, actually, I do see a question that just came through.
Yeah.
Do you know anything about the laws related to wearables? I have moms that want to use a wearable, but denied if they work in a food industry. I got your email, Lori, and I've been thinking about this. She was told it's against food safety regulations. Manager told her that if she wears it, to not tell anyone. This was disturbing to her. How much noise do these make? Can someone wear this and no one would know? Another was denied because a coworker objected to it. She works as a dispatcher. Really good question. And answer in as much time as you can give. I know you have more slides to come as
Absolutely.
well.
So the second part, somebody objected to it, depending on their work environment. If they were a dispatcher, it sounds like they are in a public space, maybe a police station or a fire station or something like that. Typically the law says that the only place somebody can object to pumping is in their own home. So that sounds like something that she could go back against, especially if she is in a union. She does have protections against different things, especially with some of the new laws and legislation that have come about. So that's definitely one that I would push back on, a coworker objecting. I will say these wearables, the LV pumps, so we do have a comparison grid at Acelleron, and I tried to do decibel testing, and it was terrible because I'm in an office, so it's really hard to do. Manufacturers do their decibel testing in a closed environment. And when they're doing that, LV says that there's no discernible sound, decibel, over regular room air and noise. So those are super silent. The Willows are also fairly silent. The majority of I keep pointing over here, like you can see, I have pumps to my side. The majority of standard pumps like Spectra and Zomi are also super quiet. So if somebody would notice, I doubt it. When I tested the original Willow and LV when we first got them at Acelleron, I was like, oh, let me put them on and pump near somebody at billing. And they had no idea. Actually, with the LV at one point, the person in billing heard my milk hitting the bottle and not the pump. And they were like, oh, some splashing going on, what's happening? And that's when they realized I was pumping. So they are fairly quiet, the majority of pumps. For the idea and regulation around food safety, that is really interesting. It's something that I have seen for healthcare providers, so some nurses and things like that as well. I don't have the answer to that one, but it is very intriguing to me that it would be going into a closed and sealed place. It's not out and about, that would be an issue. It also seems like a little bit of an issue for me that they would say, okay, well then you need to use it and not tell anyone, instead of providing a more beneficial option to the employee of having extended break times or things like that, or finding coverage for them, because then that puts the employee at risk and not the person that necessarily told them to just hide it, which is always a concern for me. I don't think that employers should be putting an employee in the spot of risk taking based on their. Awesome. I will look more into the food safety one. All right, I'm really quickly just going to show you a couple things that are new about pumps. So Medela is launching their hands-free, or they have launched their hands-free collection cups, and they are going to make them available with all of their models. You can see that there's the pump and style with max flow there with the new collection kits. Families can still get them with the standard collection kit as well. So they get to choose. Insurance covered is most likely going to be the standard collection kit. This is one that is transparent, so they can possibly see a little bit, but you can see that backflow protector is there, and it's the standard yellow for Medela, so a little bit hard to see around. So something you may see people talking about. Something to note for that is the pump and style hands-free collection cups have a seal that needs to be in place. I've actually received feedback from families that when they switched from one size breast shield to the other size that's included in their kit, they forgot to move the seal over, and then they lost all their milk from a pumping session, which can be really disheartening. So just something to know. You see a pump style for Medela hands-free, it does make sure that seal is in there before they start pumping. I'm including Lancino here because Lancino's suite of offerings has really kind of shifted a little bit. So they brought back the Signature Pro as a standard insurance coverage choice, and they have a Smart Pump 3.0 over the 2.0 now, which has 3 breast shield sizes included. And they also have a wearable. A lot of wearables you'll see coming out on the market, but so Lancino has sort of shifted it up or around. You won't necessarily see that Smart Pump 2.0 as often, and you will see the Signature Pro back, which is a little confusing to families. A little confusing to me too sometimes. All righty, I'm going to jump into what's new for accessories. So one thing and one big issue I have with pumping is that there are so many things thrown out there to us. There are so many things to try to make it better, to make it easier, more efficient, all of these things. So a lot of us have seen these. The way that I talk about it with families is what's actually going to accentuate your pumping journey and not just add to things to remember. So, you know, heating pads and things like that. This flower one is a heating and cooling pad that can be used. I think it's great to possibly put some heat on your chest before you pump, maybe to, you know, aid in that release of the milk. I think it's also great if you have any plugged ducts or mastitis or things like that to possibly use some cooling. This looks really pretty and I think it's really cool. But it is pieces that can be separated. I would absolutely lose this parts of it. I do think it's nice that it can be customized size-wise, but it is, you know, a lot that's being thrown out there for pricing. I don't remember the price of this. I don't think it was exponentially expensive, but in addition to everything else, it could possibly be. You also are not going to have access to the chest for any chest hand massage with that on there, or you may not, depending on chest size. So that's something to be considered or consider, and you also will have some difficulty seeing the nipple placement or if anything changes. They also have things that you wear that are in actual bra, or you put them in your bra, and they're creating some sort of massage of the chest. This could be super helpful. I think that a lot of these aids can be really helpful, you know, if somebody has RA, or, you know, some, you know, musculoskeletal things, and they're not able to do hands-on massage themselves. A lot of these can be really helpful. And I think accessibility to pumping is really important. But I also think that, again, I can't imagine that this is super inexpensive of a tool. And then you're losing out on the skin to skin that you can have with yourself if you are doing some hand massage. And so it can have benefits. It could be used. But I think that when people are asking about this, really considering their circumstances, personality, preferences, and lifestyle. There are massagers to help get plugged ducts out. You know, a vibrating toothbrush can do something similar. Some of these massagers have heat in there, and they can get more and more expensive. And so people will ask, you know, should I do that? Absolutely. If they would like to invest in those things, they can. I don't think it is going to necessarily make or break their pumping journey. And then lastly, we have some storage options. So on the right, it's just a cooler with a storage. You know, it's just like a regular cup, sort of like we would have for a water bottle, but it has an ice pack in there. I'm assuming that this one and most of the other brands can also be used as a water bottle. So that's awesome. But these are things that are out there. Some of them can't be put in the dishwasher. Just something to be aware of. If you're having a family that you're working with where you're concerned about some of those hygiene things, something that's reusable like that probably isn't the best option. Although it is maybe cost effective over time, it is something to consider. You want to make sure that the health of the milk that's in the container is considered. So something like storage bags could be slightly of a better option depending on the family and their needs, because they are single use and they are sealed before every use. So just something to consider. For storage bags, the reason why I included those on there, there are a million different brands nowadays. What I tell people to look for are sort of like a double zipper, or ones where you're allowed to freeze a storage bag flat in the freezer. Storing them flat in the freezer, we all know, you know, has something to do with you know, how much space you have in the freezer, as well as once that milk is being defrosted and the efficiency of that defrosting and the breakdown of nutrients as well. So the more surface area with that milk being flatter, the more effective and efficient that could be. So storage bags have so many options out there, but the majority of insurances are starting to cover them. So milk storage bags are now a covered accessory for almost all, well, I won't say almost all, the majority of Medicaids, as well as many, many commercial insurances. And these are typically covered for about the first 12 months of baby's life, or when a prescription is on there. So most insurances do require a HCPCS code, which that code is changing, going from K as in King 1005 to an A code, just like the other accessories for pumps. But it also has to have a diagnosis and things like that as well. So definitely something to look into if you know that you have a family that is going to be pumping and storing milk. If they can get those covered through insurance, they absolutely should do that. Many DMEs offer it, many insurances, you can call them and ask them directly about the benefit as well. Any questions about accessories? Okay.
I'm seeing a couple of questions that have just come through. One, it's not recommended any longer to use vibrators or toothbrushes for blocked ducts. It's not recommended to apply heat when the milk is in, as it increases the risk of blocked ducts and mastitis. So it sounds like that's more of a statement. If you have any thoughts on that, you're welcome to share. I just want to ask the next question. If it is a question, let me see. I think the ABM protocol, Academy of Breastfeeding Medicine protocol on the mastitis spectrum is super helpful, revised in 2022. Discussion and protocol is to not use heat, but ice, and to not massage deeply. I'm concerned with massagers on the market with lots of heat and deep massage, which goes against current recommendations.
Is there any other one?
No, nope.
Okay. Yeah, exactly. So the updated regulations are something that we're seeing, but it's not necessarily something that families are looking into or seeing, or what's being shared on social media and things where a lot of families are getting their information from. And so when they are looking at these devices and how they're marketed, heat sounds good, right? Where, you know, maybe a little bit of heat or before you pump for a small amount of time versus heat on possible mastitis symptoms or plugged duct symptoms, you know, that conversation isn't really spelled out to families, obviously by an item being marketed to them to sell. So it's definitely something to take in with a grain of salt and to consider if it's actually something that they need. And then the massagers and things like that, they're not always used well, right? So a lot of products have a lot of teaching on how to use it, but they don't actually provide it. It's in the manual. And I will tell you, the majority of people don't read a manual, whether it's about a pump or any other product. So then they're just using it however they think they're supposed to. And maybe they're massaging one point on their chest over and over, and they're not moving it, which, you know, again, can cause more problems. And so, yes, those protocols are super important. And these products and things that are coming out are not necessarily directed towards protocols, and they don't necessarily update when protocols. Great, thank you. All right. So really quick, I just wanted to shout out that some of the pump brands are coming out with new cycle and pattern options. Some of them can be very helpful. Some of them I think could be problematic depending on the person using it. Excuse me, the LV Smart Rhythm is with the LV standard only, and they have 3 different options in their app. There's the multi-switch, which goes between stimulation expression for the person pumping. So it's going to go back and forth between that in a standard pumping session, instead of the person going into stimulation for a few minutes until their letdown happens and then maintaining an expression for the majority of their pumping time. So this is sort of similar to what the Zomi Z2 2-phase mode is. It's going back and forth between stimulation or massage and then expression. They also have an express and collect, which is a pause between cycles. So a pause between each suck. Part of what they're considering here is if somebody has a lot more milk that is letting or coming out with each suck or cycle pull of the pump, a lot of times it can back up or cause some sort of leaking. And so that's what that Smart Rhythm is supposed to help with. And then the slow and gentle, it's gentle with a gradual increase in intensity. So instead of somebody having to go through the suction strength on their own and gently ease up, the slow and gentle is doing that for them, as well as a slightly different pattern to the suck. So these are things that LV came out with. Again, it's only for their standard pump. It may be confusing to families. It's not something that they're going to see on the pump motor. It's only controlled in the app itself. I already mentioned the Zomi Z2 two-phase mode. And then one of the things that a lot of brands are coming out with now are other rhythms like the LV, but also power pumping buttons. So I think a lot of families or a lot of pumping individuals think that they have a low milk supply. Whether they do or not is something that they would possibly and hopefully be discussing with a lactation provider. But I do think it's kind of helpful when it's on a pump, but it is really tricky when everybody has that on their pump, if they're using it. And if it is something that people are seeing or thinking that they have and they don't necessarily have a true concern with milk volume, milk output, having that right on the pump motor could be possibly problematic. And so not everyone needs to power pump. So, you know, having the option there, it's how are you not going to try the other button on your pump? So something to be aware of, that a lot of these pumps are starting to, their new thing after hospital strength, after closed system, after dual motor are these cycle pattern options. So be in the know as much as you can, look up manuals ahead of time because it will be confusing to families as they come out. All right, so I only have like a minute or so I'm going to really talk about support. I think that support for pumping is really important. The focus has been on postpartum, right? Once somebody has their birth and they start pumping, their milk increases in volume to mature milk and things like that, right? I think prenatally, it's very important as well. A lot of hospitals will have somebody get a pump right after having their baby. And they may have options or they may be given just one pump, depending on what hospital they're going to and so on. I think that's really tricky. I think having just one option is a disservice to somebody because everybody is different and may need something a little bit different. But I also think that deciding on a pump, even if you do have options, within a few days of giving birth is a really bad time to be deciding on what pump you may or may not want. But I do also understand that people need access to pumps soon after birth. So I think prenatal education is really important. So discussing the different types of pumps, the different things to consider when choosing a pump, how portable it is, the suction settings. Do you want to have a ton of control or just, have it sort of do a lot of it for you? What kind of strength do you think you might need? Do you have multiples? Is your baby possibly going to be delivered early, before 37 weeks and so on and so forth? So having those discussions is really important. I think this is not just on lactation providers. I think this is also on manufacturers and this is on DMEs and the like. So I think that I know insurance companies are not going to offer this information. So DMEs and manufacturers should be working on this with families, not deciding for them, not taking choice out of it, but giving them the educated decision-making factors so that they can find the best pump for them. And if they want to wait to actually have it ship until baby is arrived and they're sure they don't need a different choice, that's also a consideration that could be made. I mentioned this about lactation and pumping support by DMEs and brands. I have been encouraging every brand that Acelleron works with and beyond for them to offer support for their products. Now, everyone offers a warranty of a year or two, 90 days for their accessories and things like that. But I don't mean just troubleshooting. I mean flange fit, getting the accessories, using them with other products, what to do if they don't have a flange size available that somebody actually needs, and whether that does invalidate their warranty. So lactation support and things for that, and then referring out when needed, right? So it's one thing for a brand to have an IBCLC on staff. It's another thing for a family to see an unrestrained IBCLC that's not connected to a brand as well. So I do think it's important that they offer this support and they are referring out or moving up to other providers as needed. One of the newest topics are pumps through pharmacies and reimbursement. So if somebody buys a pump on Amazon and gets reimbursed through their through their insurance, My main concern around this is the support and what products are out there. So as I mentioned earlier, the Amazon effect, and all of the different pumps that have come out on the market. Same exact pump can come out and be labeled by different manufacturers, and so it can get very confusing and overwhelming to families. So just something to think about with a lot of the data input that's being requested currently. I think that support is super important around that, and sometimes it can make it a little tricky. I do think that prescription requirements for pumps for a lot of insurances, again, I'm in Mass, can be also very tricky, and so there are things to consider on that end of it as well. Lastly, warranties. I personally believe that each manufacturer should have a warranty of at least 2 years for their pumps if they are marketing it as a pump that can be used for exclusive pumping and one that can be maintained throughout a lactation journey due to the AAP update in 2022 of at least 2 years, and so on and so forth. So many pump brands still do not have a 2-year warranty. I am encouraging them to move, but that's something that is not up to me, but I will continue to pester about. In addition to that, for manufacturers and their support, I think it's really important for manufacturers to offer support in other languages, including their manuals. So Medela has languages available for their manuals, lots of different ones. Some manufacturers are really working towards it, or they're working with translation services for support over the phone. But it's something that I think every manufacturer should be doing. And not all of them are, but hopefully we can get to a point where they are all doing that. I talked about this earlier. This is my last thing, just tips. Research ahead of time if possible. Yourself, Grace, there's no way to know about all these pumps. I can't know about all of them. I can't try all of them. It's just not something that is going to be possible when you are also providing all of these other areas of support. So feel free to learn with them and use the manual and let them know. Sometimes it takes a little bit of the stress off the family to have you are the expert in lactation, how pumps work. This is just a slightly different pump to me. So, let's look at it together and I'll help you navigate it. So I will open to questions. These are my twins.
Oh, cute. Oh, thank you so much, Brittany. That was really great info. I'm going to give folks a chance to add some more questions if they want. In the meantime, I'll read what's in there now. Mary Block wants to give a shout out to Dr. Jane Morton out of Stanford for her research on hands-on pumping. Firstdroplets.com is a great resource, and she has a video on using your hands while you pump, plus other videos. So second that, great advice. I feel like this topic of pumps could be much, much longer. There's so much to talk about pumping and pumps in general. So thanks for offering what you could in this hour. And then Robin made a great point. I like this suggestion too, so the questions you mentioned when choosing a pump would be a handy, simple handout. In my experience, families are still overwhelmed learning about breastfeeding even prenatally. Having a list of questions to consider would be a good reference for them. So that's a great idea. If you happen to do that, Brittany, share that with us. Otherwise, we might think about doing that too. We'll see.
Yeah.
And then I just saw one come through from Ariana. We've been coming across a few mothers who have actually left the hospital with a personal pump that is not a loaner in Maine. Our IBCLCs are wondering if anyone has heard where or through what program is supplying these pumps.
So they're getting it at the hospital?
Right. So it's a question for our audience, I suppose, if anyone knows where. So leaving, and is this any hospital in Maine, Ariana, or is this Maine General? And when you say personal pump, is that a hand pump, or Michelle is saying they are billing insurance. They're leaving the hospital with a personal pump that is not a loaner. Feel free to unmute.
Yeah,
okay.
Am I unmuted?
Yes.
I am. Awesome.
Yes.
We were just having our staff meeting, and just a few of our moms have been coming in just saying that, and it's not at Maine Gen, so we just were wondering if anybody has heard of it, I guess. I was just asked to ask this during our meeting.
Awesome. Yeah. So MJ is responding. She had her baby at EMMC, got a personal pump, expect her to go home with her in the 6 months ago, never paid for it. CLC filled out some paperwork, so it was billed to her insurance and she never had to pay or be reimbursed. And Lisa's saying, assuming that they're billing for it as well, that the hospital is billing for it. Interesting.
So the one comment I'll make is DMEs can do prenatal or postpartum ordering of pumps. So some hospitals have a DME that they're working with directly in the hospital. And that is sometimes how somebody can get a pump when they're there in our postpartum, and then taking it home with them, and the paperwork is submitted through the DME for billing insurance. The only issue with that is it does limit typically the amount of options that the pumping individual has, just because capacity for space, delivery, and time frames.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Oh, great. MJ is sharing. If you can all click on that link, it's a Google Drive link, a Google Doc link, I believe, for the paperwork that was used for hers. It's just opening up my Drive, MJ, so that didn't work for me. But and someone from Soft Corner Midwifery saying, I was recently informed by MMC, Maine Medical Center, that a hand pump is included in the client's care if they ask for it. I assume they billed for it. All right. Well, your contact info is there, Brittany. So thank you for sharing that. Thank you for your time in today and putting all this information together and sharing with us. Thank you everyone for joining us. Molly, I see your question. The recording will be shared. It will be on our YouTube page. And we have a wonderful volunteer, Robin, who is here, who will also be reviewing our subtitles. We like to review those before we publish that on YouTube. So it could take a week or two, and however long it takes Robin to go through. It takes a bit of time to do that. So thank you, Robin, for volunteering to do that.
Kara, will everyone have access to the links and different resources that were shared in the chat as well?
Yes.
That would be great.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It was great to sort of present, and I got to see some of you, but I hope you all have a great day.
Thanks. You too. Have a great day, everyone.
Bye-bye.